Hello, Scott Hebner here. Welcome back to the Next Frontiers of AI podcast. Our objective, to partner with a network of industry experts and pioneers to explore the latest developments shaping the future of AI and how to prepare now rather than later. With innovation cycles and the pursuit of higher ROI moving at warp speed, staying up to date is more important than ever. Our view here at theCUBE Research is that 2025 will mark the year of game-changing advances anchored in the rise of agentic AI. Many recent surveys, such as from Deloitte and Boston Consulting Group and McKinsey, to name a few, have indicated that over 9 in 10 enterprises plan to start the journey to agentic AI, but only 1 in 3 have clarity on how to get started. In this episode, we look to simplify that roadmap and explore the key challenges and changes that have to be implemented in the tech stack to kind of get started on this journey. I'm thrilled to be joined by my colleague and debate partner, George Gilbert, who has been thinking a lot about this kind of getting started question for a long time. George is our principal analyst here at theCUBE Research, focused on data platforms, intelligent apps, and agentic frameworks. Welcome, George, and thanks so much for being here.
Good to see you, Scott.
So you've been doing a lot of thinking on this. I know ever since I joined here back in September, you got me hooked on agentic AI as sort of the overriding movement that's occurring here, and all the things that I was heavy into, like explainability and causal AI and things of that nature, kind of become the carburetors in the bigger car of agentic. So you're doing a ton in this space, including talking to vendors, right?
Yeah, just that it's a big revolution that agents are driving. It's the first one that, for the first time, software learns the business process. We've had predictive AI, prescriptive AI, but we've never had software where, for 60 years we wrote the rules of the business process. Now we learn them, and then that's going to drive a revolution in how we store and shape the data about the business, and that's what we want to elaborate on.
Yeah, so let's start what appears to be the Wild West of people, defining what an AI agent is and what agentic AI is and how it's different from assistants and generative AI. And as I've been reading not only studies but just like on LinkedIn and having conversations with people, there seems to be varying views of sort of this roadmap from what people are familiar with today to, what's an agent, what is agentic AI, what's your view on all this in terms of how people should frame, let's just say, the journey ahead over the next many years that we're embarking on here?
Well, picking up on this theme that, for 60 years of enterprise software, we've built applications where we hand-coded these rules procedurally, the rules of the business process. But that was so expensive and relatively inflexible that we could really only reach a fraction of business process activity. And the potential for agents is that they can reach the 80 or 90% of the fractals of business processes that you couldn't possibly encode procedurally. That's, I think, where the excitement's coming from.
Yeah, the notion of the agentic, networks of agents that are collaborating together, right, to solve goals. And the way I've been thinking about all this is, an assistant that we're all familiar with, anchored in generative AI, is task oriented, right? You give it a prompt, it knows how to generate a task. It could be, analyzing information, create some content, summarize this document, predict, why is this happening or what's happening, things of that nature, very task oriented, where the agents get you into this idea of, I have a goal to accomplish. How do I go about achieving that goal? And I really think it has the potential, as the technology matures in the years ahead, to revolutionize decision-making in business, because, humans can use the help to really understand the precise chain of events that leads to a desired outcome, and be able to model those changes. And the idea of moving from predictions to interventions, from tasks to goals. So, in my mind, the North Star, and this may be many years off, but I think where this is all heading in time is the creation of AI agents that help humans understand, these chain of events and even act autonomously when human intervention is not feasible or affordable, right? And we get to this promised land of an agent that knows why things happen and events occur. It understands the consequences of potential decisions or actions. It can actually explain how to achieve a goal and the pathways to success. And then human beings can problem solve because they're going to be able to intervene with the AI agent. They're going to be able to discover causal drivers. They'll be able to detect root causes and counterfactually reason and, do what if scenarios and say, kind of interrogate the agent to help make the best decisions. I think that's what an agent is going to grow up to be. And then when you take a collection of them and they work as a network where you get swarm intelligence and they learn from each other and their conditions, and it has the potential to be quite transformative. No?
One maybe concrete analogy that folks could relate to is think of a Tesla or probably more accurately a Waymo, but maybe fewer people are familiar with that. You put in the address, you put in the destination, that's the goal. And then it figures out all the tasks within the business process, get on this road, turn left, go to that intersection, turn right. At each, there's many tasks to accomplish this process, and it's got to invoke tools. An agent would invoke tools to do that. The tools here are the steering wheel or the accelerator or the brake. And then what you were talking about, getting even more sophisticated, is when you might have a fleet of these cars accomplishing this, like a robo-taxi fleet. That's one way of thinking of an agent. And, as we'll talk about, they have to learn, so every time they make a mistake, there's a human supervisor or driver, takes control of the wheel, and that adds then to the training set. But like you were talking about with explainability, you can audit every decision it made on the way. Like, did it turn right? Did it stop for this car? Did it stop for that pedestrian? Hopefully.
Yeah, and from the conversations I've been having and just how I've internalized all this is I think of an agent maybe a little bit more individual, for an individual to, decision intelligence, maybe a little bit of problem solving, helping put a path forward to solve a goal. When you wire those things together into agentic systems, that's when you start getting to an organizational goal, right? Or you're trying to solve more complex problems that a single agent can't do. And so the differentiation between an agent that may be helping, a sales clerk do things, right, versus an agentic system that wires that sales agent, into a bigger process, right? I mean, am I thinking about that right?
Yeah, definitely. Because right now we're at the point where we're exploring what an individual agent can do, like you said, and that's augmenting the productivity of an individual person, and sometimes even automating an individual person. Like in a call center, you might offload a whole bunch of activity from human agents to these AI agents. But what you were saying is where we go far beyond it, where we want to align the activity along larger corporate goals. The first goal is, as you were talking about, for an individual agent, is resolve this customer service inquiry. The larger goal is, prevent customer churn. A larger goal even than that is make sure any product returns fit into our policy, which, has a constraint of meeting our free cash flow goals. There's a hierarchy of goals that an organization has. But that's what makes an organization. It's keeping everyone aligned toward those goals. We don't yet really have the technology to do that with a swarm like you're talking about, but that's where we want to go. And that's where we want to give a vision of people of how these investments will take them towards that goal. They'll have productivity, not just from people, but from agents.
Exactly. And I think we have a long way to go. But I think that's where this is all heading. And it starts off with what agents can do and how you build them, and then how you start to create these agentic networks that are very adaptable. They, can adapt to real-time conditions. You can, intervene with them and do what if scenarios. I mean, I think it's a great vision to go to the next level here. But I think a lot of people are looking for, how do I think about this in, let's say a high level, right? Just how do I frame it? What's the organizing construct to think about this? And so I've sort of come up with this notion of the ladder to agentic AI, meaning metaphorically, how do you start to climb to get to this North Star, right? And I think it starts where we are today, right? Which is you have to have a foundation of some predictive models, foundation models. You have to have the LLMs and the generative AI, because that's going to be the guts of the system. That's what's going to allow you to do the, to me, it's like the carburetor in the car. I mean, it's a key part of the thing that you then have to build upon. But the truth be told is today's LLMs and generative AI and even predictive models, there's a lot of limitations to those capabilities, right? They operate on correlation. Correlation doesn't mean or imply causation. A prediction is not a judgment, right? They tend to operate off past experiences and therefore don't adapt well to the future. They can't explain themselves, so on and so forth. So the premise here is you have to have this generative AI LLM foundation, but then you got to build an ecosystem and architect an ecosystem of models that begin to build in all the new capabilities that these agents are going to need. And then you build the agents that then get wired together. So that's sort of the premise here. And I think step number one would be the first rung, right? Which is really about ensuring that it understands the domain and the unique language of your use case, which tends to vary by business, industry, region, and so on. So George, why don't you maybe talk a little bit about, that first fundamental step they have to take, which is about that domain knowledge.
So the domain knowledge comes from two sources. First, you've got that vanilla pre-trained LLM. That's the models we're familiar with, GPT-4, Gemini, Anthropic. But then you would fine tune it with data that teaches it about your particular subject matter, and this is called post-training. And you might show it not just request responses, but knowledge and about tasks in a particular area or problem solving in a particular area. That's what goes into the model, sort of where you're changing the weights of the model. It's still sort of design time. There's another way of adding domain intelligence, which is shaping the data that it uses at runtime. And by shaping, it sounds a very abstract way of saying it, but you're trying to model how that problem is solved or how the business process operates. So it's not just like a dumb document. It's a business process model that might be shaped as a knowledge graph of here's how the process sequence works, or the possible paths in the process, and that would get fed into the model. That's another way of adding domain intelligence to the model. This is obviously done at runtime. So one is design time, one is runtime.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think, the LLMs and generative AI is going to give you that sort of sweep up the entire internet and all the knowledge everywhere, and it gives you that foundation. Then let's say you're doing a use case for like contract law in financial services. You're going to you need the data fine-tuned, you need the models to understand the know-how and the expertise. And let's just say the semantic relationships between entities within a data set and a workflow. I mean, sort of like semantical reasoning, if you will. That all happens at this layer. And you want if the agents are going to help make decisions and help execute tasks and potentially do them autonomously, you want it to understand your specific domain, which you're not going to get from an LLM alone. So you got to build around it, correct? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. Sometime you could do it design time with post-training or runtime where you can encode the semantics, like in a knowledge graph.
Yeah, that's where the knowledge graphs come in as critical. Then you get into graph rag and all that kind of stuff. Okay, good. So from there, that gets you to the next rung, which is where you start to infuse in decision intelligence and a greater degree of explainability. In other words, if you're going to have these agents help you make decisions or act on their own, you're going to want them to understand sort of the consequences of their actions and why one action is better than another action, right? And be able to actually explain the pathways, that precise chain of events that will get me to the outcome that the agent is recommending. Because if you're unable to explain it, you're going to have a trust issue. Is anyone really going to trust it? And you may also have a policy issue from your business, and you may have a compliance issue with federal regulations, right? So there's got to be a greater degree of explainability. And then the decision intelligence becomes really important. And this is where you get into the world of AI reasoning. So this is where you start to infuse or take advantage of things like chain of thought that's becoming more prevalent out there, or the semantic reasoning that a symbolic neural network can provide, or even knowledge graphs built into an AI model. That it also gets you into things like causal AI, where you can build models that understand the cause and effect mechanisms, so that if you do X, here's the potential of what might happen with Y, and you change this and that. Those so-called reasoning technologies become really important to do decision intelligence, because you're going to want to intervene with it, right? What if I do this? What if I do that? Play around with counterfactuals, like if I change the temperature 1 degree in this direction and the humidity 1 degree in this direction, what could potentially can happen here? And actually understand the causal drivers of what happens here, right? I mean, that's how people do decision making and problem solving. And there's technologies that are being delivered in the marketplace today that simplify how you do that. And it's democratizing it for the masses. And you got all the big guys out there, OpenAI and Gemini, over there, and, IBM and a bunch of others that are doing research in this area. And I think after the domain intelligence comes decision intelligence. Thoughts on that?
And I'm listening to you, and because today what happens is you use the agent to help make a decision, and if you want to make it precise, repeatable, performant, and explainable, you materialize it back into the data, most usually like the knowledge graph itself. But what you're describing is what happens when you want more general decision intelligence and you don't want to have to sort of mechanize it for the future. You want it to be able to perform that decision making where it can explain itself in a new sort of in a new decision where the data is the data distribution is different, essentially. And what you're describing is where the knowledge graph lives in the agent. It doesn't have to be spit out and put into a database. So in other words, it can reason explainably and predictably itself. That's something that's advanced, and that's of great value.
Yeah, I think it takes a knowledge graph, which is entities and relationships and understands meaning, right, and context. And then when you start to do some of the reasoning stuff like causal reasoning, then it infuses the cause and effect mechanisms. And I think more importantly, it allows you to intervene with the model or the agent and start to ask those questions. And it understands the future state where LLMs only understand the past state, because you can do counterfactual reasoning with it. Again, changing variables, conditions, how does that change an outcome if we were to change those things? Or think about emergent trends of something that might happen. If I was, to do this, what would happen? It gets you into decision intelligence. And I think that technology is out there today. My research says it's probably used around 10, 15% of the businesses. For example, BMW's using it. Scambuy's using it. A bunch of others are using it with great success so far. I think it becomes more and more available. And then that brings with it, the model, an LLM can tell you what to do. It can predict something, but it can't tell you how and why this is the best thing to do. And when you're able to have that decision intelligence and reasoning, it gets you to explainability. And I think explainability is going to become the currency for innovation going forward. If your agents and your models can't explain themselves, you're going to run into a trust issue. So that's got to make progress in the context of agents in the years ahead. Otherwise, it may slow things down a little bit here.
I think you're on to something that's really critical, because today the only way you get explainability, repeatability, and precision is once the AI makes a decision, you encode it outside the AI, in the knowledge graph or something that's a substitute for that. What you're talking about is when it can internalize that and then use that for reasoning in the future. That is very advanced and very valuable.
Yeah, I agree. And, the debate is, I think we're going to start to see that kind of capability get democratized for the masses in 2025, but certainly by 2026, 2027, I think it's going to become much more prominent and, excuse me, easier to use because these great tools and platforms that are getting built by some pioneers. But let's go on to the next rung number 3 on the ladder, which is, okay, you have your domain intelligence, your domain knowledge. You're able to, add some explainability, decision intelligence, quote unquote, reasoning into the models, right? So you have this kind of model ecosystem that's architected to work together. Then from there, you got to pick a platform, an IDE, if you will, to actually build agents that are specific to your business and your use case. And, the research I've been looking at, big debate about, do you build all the agents yourself or do you buy them on the open market and customize them? I think there's whole marketplaces of AI agents that are starting to be put in place out there. So, right now, the estimate is around 50-50, but I bet over time, more and more people buy, an agent that does customer, purchase order entry or whatever, and then customize it versus build everything from scratch. But that platform to be able to build the agents becomes the next major rung, right? Because you got to start building some of the actual agents. You agree with that, George?
Yeah, there's a lot of tools out on the market to do that. I think where the tools get interesting are the ones that are the ones you're talking about, where you can build the explainability and the decision intelligence into the agent. Because right now, most of the tools they're kind of generic, where they're like, you program goals and guardrails, but they can work for any domain. The ones that are interesting, I think, the ones that you're getting at, where your tools for, okay, so how do you make procurement decisions, or how do you do business planning decisions? Tools that allow you to customize those. I think that's going to be interesting. That we don't have a lot of yet. We have a lot of generic ones.
Right. But clearly, if you're thinking about that rung, it's about getting, you're going to have to build some agents, right? And it's a little bit different than an assistant. And, those agents then tap into the model ecosystem that we were just talking about, including the Gen AI and the LLMs. And I think a lot of them will actually be purchased on the open market, as I said, and customized. But that gets you to the 4th rung, right? As you climb the ladder to the promised land of agentic AI, is, okay, it's great to have some agents, and these agents can do things, and they can help individuals perhaps make better decisions about, a property purchase or whatever. It's another whole thing to take the agents and wire them together into an agentic system, right? And, that's, I know, George, where you're super knowledgeable about is these agentic frameworks. You want to spend a little bit of time on that, because that is different than deploying a single agent to help Scott Hebner make better decisions on my finances, right? Versus.
So let me give you a concrete example, because and this one I've talked to the folks who are building it. Amazon.com has perhaps the most advanced supply chain operation in the world, if not the most, one of them. And they are in the process of rolling out agentic systems where they train an army of agents to figure out, once they have a 2-year forecast for 400 million SKUs by region for each 2 weeks, going out 2 years, that's an assumption then that the operations have to figure out how are they going to service that demand. So then they have an army of agents that figures out, okay, where am I going to need capacity? How am I going to need to configure each of those fulfillment centers or distribution centers? How am I going to have to set up trucking lanes between them? How am I going to have to staff these places? So these are decisions that might be 2 years out in terms of capacity acquisition and construction, 1 year out in terms of configuration, or 6 months, all the way down to an agent that then knows, having deployed the inventory for specific configuration in the distribution center, how should a particular fulfillment center worker pick, pack, and ship to fulfill that particular order. And all these agents are acting, in a sense, with swarm intelligence, in the sense that they are guided by one North Star objective, which is meeting a free cash flow growth goal for Amazon. They all have their own local goals, but they are guided by a North Star goal. And so the idea is that there is, they don't just pick the local optimum solution, but it's constrained or organized by the global goal or optimum.
Right.
That's an example, a concrete example.
And there's more and more of these platforms coming out where they help you kind of wire these things together, orchestrate them, do the RAG, between them, and to help, customers do this without having to do everything from scratch, correct?
Yeah, I would add only one last thing. I thought, like maybe a year ago, that the hardest part was the orchestration, but I think we're going to find that the hardest part is having a harmonized view of the state of the business, because as all these agents are doing what today we would call analytics, but they're doing simulations to say, well, if I do this and you do that, what does the business look like? You need a map of the business under all these different states. That's that is going to look awfully like a knowledge graph, because you're going to have to harmonize the state of all the data and the applications, so that when everyone's taking all these different actions in these hypothetical scenarios, it can all be synchronized and harmonized. And that's the coordinating glue for that army of agents.
Is that your notion that we've talked about a lot, about the metrics tree?
Yes. The metrics are going to tell you, well, if I do this, it's going to have this impact on the outcome, this outcome. And all those metrics are linked, in a tree, all the way up to that North Star of growing free cash flow growth, as one example.
Yeah. So I think what you get here is you get to a point where you're creating, agents, and there might be some simple task agents, there might be some decision, agents, there might be some planner agents, some orchestration agents, and then these things kind of get wired within a framework. And then obviously you have to have observability, and there's the whole deployment side of things here. But where this gets really interesting, if we kind of go, and this isn't really a rung, but it's the concept that what ties all this stuff together, and we'll bring up the graphic here of the bottom right here of this learning loop, right? Where this whole thing gets tied together and it continuously learns, because each agent has a specialization. They might operate off a certain set or subset of data, and they're learning, and they're going to learn from the other agents, and they're going to collectively learn, and they're going to inform the models, which get smarter. It's multi-agent RAG, it's multi-agent reinforcement learning, it's emergent kind of things that, imitation, I should say. There's a lot of new technologies that I've been reading about that are getting put into tools that allow everyone to learn together, right? The whole network, not just one agent.
Yeah, You're putting your finger, I think, on the most important thing, which is, I'm going on and on about the data foundation and the agentic, system and the metric tree, but the goal is, how fast can you improve your learning about how you how about the whole organization can anticipate or react to changes in, its environment. Anticipate is my forecast going out 2 years. It's going to change like COVID comes along and I got to rethink everything. How fast can I rethink, replan, realign, all the way from my 2-year out decisions down to my, pick, pack, and ship decisions? That learning loop is going to be probably the biggest competitive differentiator. How fast can you change your assumptions? That's the forecast bit, and then realign all your activities. That's the learning bit.
Yeah, I mean, over the last couple of decades, I've been involved in all this stuff. There's always been this notion of vendors talking about the on-demand enterprise, right? That adapts and quickly to changing conditions and customer requirements, and I think this is where you start to make this reality where the learning loop helps everyone learn and therefore adapt to new conditions and to doing things better and learning from what has worked and what hasn't worked. And it's more automated than it has been in the past and could bring that to life. But, it's certainly going to be a journey. And I think the one thing, George, that's true, immutable fact about the move we're moving from the last several years of a focus on generative AI and LLMs to this new world of agents and agentic is it's going to require changes up and down the IT stack, right? Particularly in the software space, but even beyond that. So you can't just take the generative AI technologies and put new clothing on them, and they're not going to, you're just not, those are insufficient to do what we're talking about here. So there's got to be changes, correct?
Yeah, I would regard that, like what we've been doing with LLMs and RAG for the last, 2 years or whatever. That's sort of like when the PC came out and people said, "Let's put your recipes in it." I mean, it's about as useful as that. What we really need to do, is there were people when the PC came out who said, or not long after the PC came out, who said, "Look, these aren't really going to be useful until we connect them up in networks." And for 60 years, we've been building islands of applications and data in IT. And we're not really going to make all that useful until we harmonize that so that the agents can work together across that infrastructure with people. It's not lights out, the factory with just a man and a dog where the man's there to feed the dog and the dog's there to keep the man from touching any of the machinery. That's not going to happen. It's a collaboration of people and, carbon and silicon intelligence working together. But we got to break down those islands. So to your point, where we change the IT stack, that's if we've ever had an imperative to integrate all these islands, it's going to be agents. It's not going to happen all at once, but we'll start building bigger amalgamations, and then we'll start bridging them, and then someone will put something that works across them.
Yeah. And looking at a lot of the use cases and talking to people, I'm coming to believe this is a much more incremental or progressive journey than it may come across. This is not rip and replace. You can, incrementally infuse everything that George and I have been talking about here, and it just gets better and better over time. But there are changes to the capabilities that you have to add to the LLMs and the generative AI capabilities to really make all this happen. And I think that's where it's all heading in the years ahead. And you're right about the recipes. When you look at ROI and in the research I've been doing for generative AI, when it's like 70 to 80% of businesses have formal deployments of generative AI, but only 18% of them would claim high ROI impact. It's implicit ROI. It is making people more productive. I see it in my job, but it's not explicit in terms of things you can really measure. This will get you, Agentic is going to start to get you into more measurable outcomes, I think.
Yeah, and I believe that the first two Gen AI use cases, broad ones, are customer service and software development. Software development because you can measure its correctness, so the learning loop is very, very tight. There's a rich feedback signal, and customer service because it doesn't have to be 100% precise, and you can escalate it easily. There's mechanisms to escalate to human if it doesn't get it quite right. Those are the first two that will really explode, I think, out of the gate.
Yeah, when I get that question, the same two, customer service and software development for sure. In fact, one of my predictions for the year was software developers become data scientists. This is going to enable them to start infusing this AI stuff on their own. I think the third one, which is maybe the other side of the coin to software development, is the world of observability and cloud management, systems management, where root cause and all that becomes really important. And I think those are the areas you're going to start to see this emerge first. I agree.
There are agents. There's a company building agents to help sift through the logs, traces, metrics, like teams of agents, because it's so hard. Yeah. That actually might be another one. I've heard of, I haven't seen it work, but I've heard of those. Yeah.
Yeah. And that kind of easily transitions into world of security. And, you can see how this propagates through. But all right. Well, look, some of the best debates I've had over the last decade have been with George. We're always talking about this stuff. I think we come from different angles on it, different parts of the stack, if you will, and been learning a ton. And I really appreciate you taking time to spend on this podcast. And let me all tell you also that we will be having a summit coming up in the mid-April timeframe. It is called the AI Agent Builder Summit. And we'll get into a lot more detail about this ladder that we just kind of metaphorically talked about, and where it's going to feature leaders and pioneers in the market that are helping real customers get real ROI out of AI agents and agentic AI. And it's designed to help everybody, businesses around the globe, kind of get this journey started. Like, what do I have to think about? What are the success factors? What are the tools and capabilities that are available and the platforms to help me get started? So stay tuned for more information on this. Mark your calendars for around mid-April. And if you're a vendor out there that provides solution or expertise, do contact us, contact me, because we have sponsorships that are open now. And I hope you all take some time and attend this summit when it comes in April. All right. So again, thank you very much, George. I always love talking with you and doing it in an open forum here. And for all of you listening in, thank you for joining us on the next Frontiers of AI podcast, hosted by SiliconANGLE and theCUBE Research. I very much appreciate you being out there. And stay tuned for more research and analysis from our team here at theCUBE Research as we dive deeper into what's shaping the future of AI in business. Visit us at thecube.net and siliconangle.com to stay connected. We are the leader in tech news and analysis. Bye for now.
Thanks, Scott.